The Invisible Woman, My Fight to Be Seen. Chapter 1. The Golden Cage. The suburban home in Memphis, Tennessee, was a picture of domestic bliss. At least, that's what everyone saw. A sprawling two-story with a manicured lawn, a two-car garage, and a gleaming, recent model SUV in the driveway. Inside, it was tastefully decorated, a testament to years of careful curation by Sarah Bennett. For 20 years, this had been her world, her sanctuary, her golden cage. Sarah had married Mark Bennett when she was fresh out of college, bright-eyed and full of dreams. Mark, older and seemingly more worldly, had charmed her with his confidence and his promises of a stable, secure future. He was, as he often reminded her, the head of the family. His decisions were law, his pronouncements absolute. Sarah, deeply in love and trusting to a fault, had never questioned his authority. Why would she? He was building their life, wasn't he? He handled everything. The finances, the investments, the house, the cars. It's simpler this way, sweetheart, he'd say, patting her hand. Less for you to worry about. I've got it all under control. And Sarah believed him. She focused on making their home a haven, raising their two now-grown children, volunteering, and occasionally indulging in her passion for baking. Her days were full, comfortable, and seemingly secure. The cracks in the golden facade had appeared subtly at first. A dismissive wave of his hand when she suggested a new idea for the garden, a critical comment about her appearance, a quiet withdrawal when she tried to share a worry or a dream. Mark's control, once comforting, had become a tightening vice. He was subtly, then overtly demeaning. Her opinions became silly, her feelings overly emotional. Their once easy conversations had dwindled to Mark issuing directives and Sarah offering meek agreements. For years, she pushed these feelings down. It's just how he is, she told herself. He's stressed with work. She convinced herself that her unease was her own fault, that she was being too sensitive, but the quiet erosion of her spirit had reached a tipping point. She felt like a ghost in her own home, an accessory to Mark's life, rather than a partner in their shared existence. The final straw came during a quiet dinner. She had mustered the courage to express her desire to take a pottery class, something she'd always dreamed of. Mark had scoffed. Pottery? What a waste of time and money, Sarah. Do you know how much that costs? We have better things to spend our money on. You have a good life here. Be grateful. The dismissive tone, the utter disregard for her small personal dream, was like a physical blow. In that moment, something shifted within her. The quiet, compliant Sarah snapped. She wasn't grateful. She was suffocating. That night, lying awake beside Mark's oblivious form, she made a decision that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. She would divorce him. She would reclaim her life, herself. The next morning, she walked into the kitchen, her heart pounding. Mark was at the counter, sipping his coffee, engrossed in his phone. "Mark," she began, her voice surprisingly steady. "I want a divorce." He slowly lowered his phone, his eyes narrowing. A cold, hard laugh escaped his lips. "A divorce? You? What do you think you're going to do, Sarah? You're nothing. Everything. This house, the business, the cars, even the money in the bank, it's all mine. You have nothing. You are nobody." His words hit her with the force of a physical blow, stealing the air from her lungs. The head of the family had just confirmed her deepest fear. She was invisible and utterly, terrifyingly alone. The golden cage had just revealed its true, brutal bars. Chapter 2: The Bitter Awakening. The reality of Mark's words crashed over Sarah with devastating force. She fled the house, her mind reeling, her body shaking. There was nowhere to go. No friends she felt comfortable burdening with the full extent of her humiliation. No family close by. Her parents had passed years ago, and her siblings lived states away, caught up in their own lives. Her first instinct was to curl up and disappear. The shame of her naivety, the crushing realization of how utterly dependent she had allowed herself to become, was almost unbearable. For 20 years, she had believed in Mark's benevolent control, his promises of security. Now, she saw it for what it was, a meticulously constructed trap. She drove aimlessly for hours, the suburban streets of Memphis blurring through her tears. Eventually, she found herself pulling into the familiar driveway of Emily's house. Emily was her oldest and dearest friend, a vibrant, no-nonsense woman who had always seen through Mark's polished veneer, though Sarah had rarely heeded her subtle warnings. Emily opened the door, her brow furrowed with concern. "Sarah? What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." The words tumbled out, a torrent of despair and betrayal. Emily listened, her face growing increasingly grim. When Sarah finally finished, exhausted and tearful, Emily pulled her into a fierce hug. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, stroking her hair. "That bastard. I always knew he was a controlling piece of work. But this is beyond the pale." Emily didn't offer empty platitudes. She offered practical solutions. "You're staying here for as long as you need. We'll figure this out. You are not nobody, Sarah. You're my best friend, and you're stronger than you think. And we are getting you a lawyer first thing tomorrow morning." The next day, still feeling numb, Sarah found herself sitting across from Daniel Mason, a family law attorney Emily had highly recommended. Daniel was a quiet man, his face kind but firm. As Sarah recounted Mark's chilling pronouncements, Daniel's expression grew serious. "Mrs. Bennett," he said, his voice measured, "your situation is challenging. In Tennessee, even if assets are solely in one spouse's name, they are typically considered marital property, subject to equitable distribution. However, if Mr. Bennett has gone to extreme lengths to hide assets, or if you signed any post-nuptial agreements you don't recall, it can complicate things immensely. We'll need to dig deep, and it won't be easy." The word equitable sounded like a foreign language to Sarah, but challenging and not easy resonated deeply. She had nothing. No credit cards in her name, no independent bank account, no income beyond what Mark gave her. Even her car was technically registered to his business. I don't even have money to pay you," Sarah confessed, her voice barely a whisper. Daniel looked at her, his gaze unwavering. "We can discuss a payment plan, or a lien against potential future assets. My priority right now is to ensure your safety and begin to unravel this. This isn't just about money, Mrs. Bennett. It's about justice." His words were a small beacon in the vast darkness she felt. The first few weeks were a painful education. Sarah learned about discovery, subpoenas, and the cold, hard language of legal battles. Mark, true to his word, fought back with venom, using every tactic to delay and deny. He hired aggressive lawyers, tried to portray Sarah as unstable and financially irresponsible. He even tried to cut off her access to joint accounts, though Daniel quickly intervened. Sarah began to feel the weight of her dependence more acutely than ever. She needed a job, anything to feel like she was contributing, to regain a semblance of control. Emily, ever practical, helped her draft a simple resume, highlighting her extensive volunteer work and her meticulous organizational skills. She found a low-wage job at a small, independent coffee shop called The Daily Grind, just a few miles from Emily's house. The work was simple: taking orders, making coffee, wiping down tables. It wasn't glamorous, and the pay was barely enough to cover her daily expenses. But it was hers. The smell of fresh coffee beans, the chatter of customers, the simple rhythm of the work. It was a lifeline, a tangible connection to a world beyond Mark's control. Slowly, painfully, Sarah began to rebuild. Each coffee she poured, each table she wiped, was a small victory. The shame was still there, a hot blush whenever she thought of her past naivety, but it was now tempered by a growing sense of defiance. She would not be nobody. She would not let Mark win. Chapter 3: Uncovering Shadows. Life at the Daily Grind became Sarah's new normal. Her colleagues, a mix of college students and artists, were kind and unpretentious. Jake, the owner, was a quiet, observant man with a passion for quality coffee and a genuine interest in his employees. He noticed Sarah's meticulous nature, her calm demeanor, even during rushes, and her surprising talent for remembering regulars' orders. Her days were grueling: early mornings at the cafe, then meetings with Daniel, phone calls, document reviews. Her nights were often restless, filled with anxiety about the divorce proceedings, the mounting legal fees, and the uncertain future. One afternoon, while taking out the trash, Sarah noticed Mr. Henderson, her elderly neighbor from across the street in her old neighborhood. He was pruning his rose bushes, a familiar, comforting sight. Mr. Henderson was a quiet, almost reclusive man, a widower who spent most of his days tending his impeccable garden. He and Sarah had exchanged polite greetings for years, but nothing more. He looked up as she passed, a faint smile on his lips. "Hello, Sarah," he said, his voice surprisingly robust for his age. "It's been a while. How are you doing?" Sarah, caught off guard, stammered a reply. "Oh, Mr. Henderson, I'm fine. Just, busy." She couldn't bring herself to explain the humiliation of her divorce. He simply nodded, his eyes, sharp and intelligent despite his age, seeming to see right through her facade. "I often saw your husband, Mark, coming and going at strange hours," he remarked, almost to himself. "Always well-dressed, of course, but he seemed to have a particular interest in that old commercial building down on Elm Street, near the old mill. Used to see his car there, late at night sometimes." Sarah paused, her mind racing. Elm Street? Mark had never mentioned any business dealings there. It was a run-down part of town, full of forgotten warehouses and old industrial sites. She had always assumed his business was solely in downtown Memphis, in the gleaming corporate towers. "Elm Street?" she repeated, a strange knot forming in her stomach. "Are you sure?" Mr. Henderson chuckled. "My eyes are old, dear, but they're still sharp. I used to walk my dog past there often." Saw his distinctive car. He must have had something going on there. He shrugged, returning to his roses. Just an old man's observation. Sarah thanked him, her heart thumping. This was a new lead, a hidden thread. As soon as she could, she called Daniel. "Elm Street?" Daniel repeated, intrigued. "That's unusual. Mark's reported business is entirely financial services. What would he be doing in an old industrial zone?" Daniel's team began to investigate. It was a slow process. Painstaking process. Public records yielded little. But the seed of doubt, planted by Mr. Henderson's observation, began to grow. Meanwhile, the divorce proceedings continued to be a draining battle. Mark was relentless, turning every hearing into a grueling interrogation. He scoffed at her requests, denied her access to funds, and painted her as a frivolous, money-hungry woman, trying to steal his hard-earned wealth. Sarah often left the courtroom, feeling emotionally battered and defeated. One evening, after a particularly brutal day in court, Sarah arrived home at Emily's, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this, Em," she sobbed, collapsing onto the sofa. "He's so powerful. He makes me feel like I deserve this, like I really am nobody." Emily knelt beside her, pulling her close. "Listen to me, Sarah Bennett," she said, her voice firm. "You are not nobody. He is a bully. He thrives on making you feel small. But you are strong. You are fighting for your life, for your future, and you are not alone." Emily's words, combined with the small, quiet victories at the daily grind, were slowly chipping away at the years of emotional abuse. Each customer who smiled, each thank you from Jake, each moment of solidarity with Emily, these were the bricks with which she was rebuilding her self-worth. The thought of Elm Street, the possibility of uncovering Mark's deception, became a quiet, burning ember of hope. Chapter 4: The Phoenix Rises. Daniel Mason called Sarah 2 weeks later, his voice clipped with controlled excitement. "Sarah, we found something. It was incredibly difficult to trace, thanks to shell corporations and offshore accounts, but Mr. Henderson's tip was golden. Mark owns a highly lucrative, undisclosed manufacturing business operating out of that Elm Street location." Sarah gasped. "Manufacturing? What kind of manufacturing?" "It appears to be specialized components for industrial machinery," Daniel explained. "Highly profitable, completely separate from his reported financial services firm. He's been funneling profits through a complex network of offshore accounts, effectively hiding millions of dollars from you and from the IRS, I suspect." The news was a jolt of pure adrenaline, not just because of the money, but because of the sheer audacity of Mark's deception. He had built an entire hidden empire right under her nose while telling her she was worthless. The anger, once a simmering resentment, now flared into righteous indignation. This wasn't just about financial control. It was about a profound, calculating betrayal. This discovery changed everything. It gave Daniel undeniable leverage. The legal battle, once a slow, grinding attrition, now picked up pace. Mark's lawyers, once aggressive, began to look panicked. The judge, previously skeptical, now listened with rapt attention. Despite the legal progress, the emotional toll remained high. Sarah was often exhausted, worn thin by the constant pressure. But she refused to break. Each court appearance, each deposition, she held her head higher. She was no longer the shrinking, insecure woman. She was a fighter. One day, during a particularly chaotic rush at the daily grind, Jake pulled her aside. "Sarah," he said, his eyes kind, "you're amazing. You handle this place like it's your own. Have you ever thought about management, or even baking?" Sarah, surprised, shook her head. "Baking?" "Yeah," he grinned. "I noticed you've been experimenting with those muffins. They're a huge hit. Customers are asking for them specifically. Your lemon poppy seed muffins are legendary." Sarah had, in fact, been baking in Emily's kitchen in her spare time, a therapeutic outlet for her stress. She had always loved it, but Mark had scoffed at it as a hobby, not a career. Jake's simple acknowledgement, his genuine appreciation for her talent, was a profound validation. "I could use someone to manage the evening shift," Jake continued, "and maybe help me expand our baked goods menu. What do you say?" The offer was a lifeline. It was a step up, a chance to learn new skills, to take on real responsibility. She accepted immediately. The new role at the daily grind was a revelation. Sarah discovered a knack for leadership, for organizing, for innovating. She introduced new recipes, streamlined operations, and even helped Jake design a more efficient customer flow. She felt a sense of purpose and accomplishment that had been missing for decades. The change in Sarah was palpable. Her shoulders straightened, her gaze met others directly, and a confident smile replaced her tentative one. She was no longer just working. She was learning, growing, and proving to herself and to the world that she was capable of so much more than she had ever allowed herself to believe. She was becoming the phoenix, rising from the ashes of her shattered past. Chapter 5: The Unseen Architect. The court case finally reached its crescendo. Mark, cornered by Daniel's irrefutable evidence of the hidden business and offshore accounts, resorted to desperate tactics. He tried to discredit Sarah, claiming she was aware of his dealings, that she had implicitly condoned them. But Daniel had built an airtight case. During a particularly tense cross-examination, Mark's lawyer tried to paint Sarah as a clueless wife, oblivious to her husband's financial empire. "Mrs. Bennett," he sneered, "you expect the court to believe you were entirely unaware of your husband's substantial wealth and a whole second business operation?" Sarah, drawing on a strength she hadn't known she possessed, looked directly at the judge. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear and unwavering, "for 20 years, my husband told me he would handle everything. He said he was the head of the family, and I trusted him. He carefully constructed a financial cage around me, where every asset, every account, was solely in his name. He systematically diminished my worth, my intelligence, my right to even ask questions. He told me I was nothing, that I had nothing." She paused, her gaze sweeping over Mark, who sat pale and rigid beside his attorney. "He was very good at making me believe that. It was a deliberate act of control and subjugation. I was not unaware, Your Honor. I was blinded by trust and then systematically disempowered. And I believe that was his intention all along." A hushed silence fell over the courtroom. Even Mark seemed to flinch. It wasn't just a legal argument. It was a powerful, raw statement of truth. The turning point came when Mr. Henderson was called to testify. Sarah hadn't realized he was a witness, and his appearance surprised her. He was frail, but his eyes still held that sharp, knowing glint. "Mr. Henderson," Daniel asked, "can you describe your observations regarding Mr. Bennett's activities near the Elm Street location?" Mr. Henderson, with calm precision, recounted his years of watching Mark's comings and goings, the unusual hours, the distinct vehicles, the secrecy. Then he delivered the unexpected blow. "I used to be a corporate attorney, you see," Mr. Henderson said, his voice carrying clearly through the courtroom, "before I retired. And while I never practiced in this specific area, I became very familiar with the kind of financial structures Mr. Bennett used. The offshore accounts, the shell corporations, it's a classic pattern. I've seen it countless times in cases of deliberate asset concealment. He was meticulously hiding assets, and from my professional experience, it was clearly premeditated fraud." The courtroom erupted. Mark's lawyers immediately objected, but the judge allowed it, given Mr. Henderson's professional background. His calm, authoritative testimony, combined with Daniel's meticulous documentation of the hidden business, sealed Mark's fate. He was not just accused of withholding assets. He was accused of calculated, long-term fraud. The judge's ruling was decisive. Mark was ordered to disclose all hidden assets and to pay Sarah a substantial portion of both his known and newly discovered businesses, along with significant alimony. The house, the cars, a share of his legitimate business, all were divided equitably. But more importantly, the judge's written ruling unequivocally stated that Mark's actions were a deliberate attempt to financially disenfranchise his spouse, demonstrating a clear pattern of malicious intent and financial deception. Sarah had won, not just the assets, but her dignity. The weight of years of emotional abuse, of feeling invisible, finally lifted. Mark's face, as the verdict was read, was a mask of furious disbelief, replaced by utter defeat. He was the one who was now nobody. Chapter 6. A New Horizon. With the divorce finalized, Sarah finally had the financial freedom she had been denied for so long. She sold the house in Memphis. It was a beautiful home, but it was tainted by years of control and the bitter memories of her marriage. She wanted a fresh start, a clean slate. She packed her life into boxes, keeping only the things that truly brought her joy and leaving behind the ghosts of the past. Emily, always her steadfast support, helped her every step of the way. "This isn't an ending, Sarah," Emily said, as they loaded the last box into the moving truck. "It's a beginning." Sarah chose Nashville, Tennessee. It was close enough to Emily for visits, but far enough to feel like a completely new chapter. The vibrant music scene, the burgeoning culinary community, the lively spirit of the city. It called to her. Her work at the Daily Grind had ignited a new passion within her: baking. The joy she found in creating delicious pastries, the compliments from customers, Jake's encouragement, it all pointed to a new path. She used a portion of her divorce settlement to invest in her dream. She enrolled in a culinary arts program specializing in baking and pastry arts. She devoured textbooks, practiced tirelessly, and discovered a talent she never knew she possessed. Her first venture was a small artisanal bakery she named the Phoenix Hearth. It was a humble beginning, a leased space in a charming, older part of Nashville. She started with a few signature items: her legendary lemon poppy seed muffins, a delicate almond croissant, and rich, decadent brownies. The aroma of freshly baked goods filled the air, a scent of hope and new beginnings. The Phoenix Hearth quickly gained a loyal following. Customers were drawn not just to the delicious treats, but to Sarah herself. Her quiet strength, her genuine warmth, her radiant joy in her work. It was contagious. She hired a small team, mostly young women, and fostered a supportive, empowering work environment. She made sure they understood their rights, encouraged their dreams, and ensured they felt valued and respected. She had learned a harsh lesson about financial dependency, and she was determined to use her experience to uplift others. She kept in touch with Daniel, sending him updates on her flourishing business. He always responded with pride, often sending new clients her way. Women who were going through their own difficult divorces, seeking not just legal help, but a role model, a story of hope. She never heard from Mark again. He faded into the background of her life, a forgotten shadow. She didn't seek news of him, didn't feel the need for closure beyond what she had already achieved. Her life was too full, too vibrant, too meaningful to dwell on the past. Chapter 7. Seeds of Wisdom. Life in Nashville blossomed for Sarah. The Phoenix Hearth expanded, adding more tables, a broader menu, and a small retail section for her artisanal jams and custom blend teas. She became a beloved figure in the local community, known not only for her exquisite baked goods, but also for her quiet wisdom and her willingness to share her story. She started a small, informal mentorship group for women who were struggling with financial independence or navigating difficult relationships. She didn't preach, she simply listened, shared her experiences, and offered practical advice on budgeting, legal resources, and most importantly, on building self-worth. She taught them that head of the family could be a beautiful partnership, but never a weapon of control. Her relationship with Emily remained strong, strengthened by shared history and unshakable loyalty. Emily would visit often, delighting in Sarah's success and the vibrant life she had built. They would sit in the bakery, sipping coffee and reminiscing, often marveling at how far Sarah had come. One quiet Tuesday morning, an older gentleman walked into the Phoenix hearth. He moved slowly, his hair white, but his eyes were still sharp and discerning. Sarah looked up from frosting a cake, and her breath hitched. "Mr. Henderson?" she asked, disbelief coloring her voice. He smiled, a gentle, knowing smile. "Hello, Sarah. I heard you'd done rather well for yourself here in Nashville. I was visiting my niece, and I thought I'd drop by." Sarah rushed around the counter, tears welling in her eyes. She hugged him, a gesture of pure gratitude. "Mr. Henderson, I can't thank you enough. You changed everything for me. Your observation, your testimony. You saved me." He patted her arm, his gaze warm. "You saved yourself, Sarah. I just pointed you in the right direction. You had the strength within you all along. I always saw it, even when you didn't." He paused, looking around the bustling, warm bakery. "This is quite a place you've built." "It's my life," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "My own. And I owe so much of it to you." They sat and talked for hours. Mr. Henderson shared more stories of his days as a corporate lawyer, of the quiet satisfaction of helping those who were wronged. He spoke of the subtle signs of manipulation, the ways in which people build these golden cages. His insights were profound, and Sarah realized that he had been an unseen architect of her escape, a silent mentor who had seen her plight and offered a lifeline, disguised as a casual observation. He spoke briefly of Mark. "He's still in Memphis," Mr. Henderson said quietly, "living a very solitary life. Lost most of his other businesses in the aftermath of your divorce. Couldn't seem to hold on to anything after that, without his careful deceptions." Sarah felt a pang, not of malice, but of a quiet, profound sadness. Mark had chosen wealth and control over love and partnership, and in the end, he had lost everything that truly mattered. His everything had turned into nothing, because it was built on a foundation of lies and a desperate need to control others. As Mr. Henderson prepared to leave, Sarah handed him a box of her finest pastries. "Please, take these and thank you again for everything." He took the box, his eyes twinkling. "You're a strong woman, Sarah, a real survivor. Don't ever forget that." As he walked out, Sarah watched him, a deep sense of peace settling over her. His visit had been a final, beautiful affirmation. She wasn't just a survivor. She was a thriver. Chapter 8, The Fullness of Freedom. Years passed. The Phoenix hearth became a Nashville institution. Sarah's story, though she rarely spoke of it publicly, was known within her circle of friends and mentees, a quiet legend of resilience. She built a life rich with purpose, community, and the deep satisfaction of self-made success. She never remarried. The idea of trusting someone with her heart and her finances again felt too daunting, and she found complete fulfillment in her independence, her business, and her deep connections with friends and family. Her children, now in their 30s, were immensely proud of her, often bringing their own friends to the Phoenix hearth, beaming as they introduced them to their amazing mom. One crisp autumn morning, as the scent of pumpkin spice mingled with fresh coffee, Sarah sat at a small table in her bustling bakery, watching the morning light stream through the windows. A young woman, tearful and hesitant, approached her. "Miss Bennet?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. "My name is Jessica. My friend Maria told me about you. She said you helped her. I'm in a situation similar to yours. My husband, he controls everything. He says I'm nothing." Sarah looked at her, seeing a reflection of her past self, the fear, the shame, the desperate uncertainty. She reached out, taking the young woman's hand. "Sit down, Jessica," Sarah said, her voice warm and steady. "Let's talk. You are not nothing. You are not alone, and you have more strength than you know." As she spoke, the aroma of fresh bread filled the air. Outside, the city of Nashville hummed with life, a symphony of new beginnings. Sarah looked around her bakery, at the happy faces of her customers, at the bustling energy of her team. She thought of her journey, the shattered dreams, the bitter awakening, the tireless fight, and the eventual triumph. She remembered Mark's cruel words, "You're nobody. Everything, it's all mine." How wrong he had been. He had held on to his everything, but in doing so, he had lost the one thing that truly mattered, his humanity, his capacity for genuine connection. Sarah, on the other hand, had started with nothing, and from that nothing, she had built everything. She had built a thriving business, a supportive community, and a life filled with purpose and true joy. She had built a legacy not of wealth or control, but of resilience, courage, and unconditional self-worth. She had learned that true wealth wasn't in assets or possessions, but in the unwavering belief in oneself, in the freedom to choose one's own path, and in the love and respect earned through integrity and strength. She was no longer the invisible woman. She was Sarah Bennet, a woman made whole, a woman who had found her voice, and a woman who had, against all odds, created her own magnificent everything. The golden cage was long gone, and in its place was a life beautiful and free, forged in the fires of adversity, shining brighter than any gilded promise. She was finally, truly, and completely free. And that, she knew, was priceless. Chapter 9, Echoes and Endings. Years continued to add their gentle layers to Sarah's life. The Phoenix Hearth thrived, becoming a beacon of warmth and community in Nashville. Now a matriarch figure in her own right, her hair threaded with silver, continued to bake, to mentor, and to live a life steeped in purpose. Her children, now adults with their own families, often visited, bringing grandchildren who would delight in the smell of warm cookies and the gentle laughter of their grandmother. They knew her story, not from her dwelling on it, but from the quiet strength she embodied, and from the occasional, carefully chosen anecdotes she shared about learning resilience. They understood that their grandmother's success was not just about building a business, but about building herself. Sarah never explicitly sought news of Mark, but in the interconnected world, snippets would occasionally surface. She learned that his financial services firm had eventually dissolved after her divorce settlement and the subsequent IRS investigation into his hidden assets. His manufacturing business on Elm Street had also crumbled. He had faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale whispered in certain Memphis business circles. He was, as Mr. Henderson had foreseen, truly alone. A quiet melancholy would sometimes touch Sarah when she thought of him. Not bitterness, but a profound sadness for a life unlived, for the wasted potential of a man consumed by fear and control. She wondered if he ever reflected on the choices he had made, if he understood the emptiness of the everything he had so fiercely clung to. She hoped, for his sake, that he had found some measure of peace, even if it was a peace born of solitary reflection, rather than genuine connection. Her own peace was abundant. It wasn't a placid, unmoving pond, but a deep, flowing river, sometimes calm, sometimes with gentle rapids, but always moving forward, carrying her gracefully through the seasons of life. She had learned that true stability wasn't about someone else's promises or possessions, but about her own inner strength, her unwavering spirit. One crisp autumn morning, as the scent of cinnamon and apple pie filled the Phoenix hearth, Sarah found herself sitting at a small table, a mug of tea warming her hands. She watched the sunrise paint the sky in hues of orange and pink, mirroring the warmth and vibrancy of her own life. She thought of the young woman who had walked into Emily's house all those years ago, stripped bare of her identity, her future, and her dignity. She had been the invisible woman, lost in the shadow of a man who believed he owned her. Now she was visible, more visible than she had ever been. Her bakery stood as a testament to her courage, her life a living embodiment of her journey, her story a quiet inspiration whispered from woman to woman. She felt a deep, profound sense of gratitude, not for the hardship she had endured, but for the profound lessons it had taught her, for the strength it had forged within her, for the love, the community, and the purpose she had discovered on the other side of betrayal. The scars were still there, faint but present, reminding her of the battles fought. But they were no longer wounds. They were badges of honor, symbols of resilience, testaments to the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be defined by another's control. She closed her eyes for a moment, breathing in the comforting sense of her bakery, feeling the warmth of the sun on her face. The past was a distant echo, the future a bright and open road. She was Sarah Bennett, and she was, finally, truly, wonderfully herself. Chapter 10. The Unwritten Epilogue. Sarah continued to build her life, brick by brick, act by act, day by day. The Phoenix hearth became more than just a bakery. It was a sanctuary, a meeting place for women who needed to hear a story of hope. Sarah started hosting informal workshops, not just on baking, but on financial literacy for women, on building confidence, and on recognizing the subtle signs of manipulative relationships. She never positioned herself as a guru, just a woman who had walked a difficult path and was willing to share her map. Her reputation grew beyond Nashville. She was invited to speak at women's conferences, to share her story of resilience. Her voice, once silenced by Mark's dominance, now resonated with quiet power, inspiring countless others. She learned that true strength wasn't about shouting or controlling, but about unwavering authenticity and a deep sense of self-worth. She sometimes wondered about Mark, not with any lingering affection or resentment, but with a detached curiosity, like one might wonder about a character in a finished book. What did he do with his days? Did he ever truly grasp the magnitude of what he had lost? The genuine connection, the loyalty, the love that he had so carelessly discarded for the illusion of total control. Sarah knew, with a certainty that settled deep in her bones, that he had lost far more than she ever had. He had lost his own soul. Her circle of friends grew, encompassing not just Emily and Daniel, who remained a valued advisor, but also Jake, who had become a lifelong friend and occasional business partner, and many of the women she had mentored. She discovered the profound richness of chosen family, a network of support built on mutual respect and shared experience. One sunny afternoon, years after her move, As she strolled through a farmer's market in Nashville, a wave of profound contentment washed over her. The vibrant colors of fresh produce, the lively chatter of vendors and shoppers, the strumming of a nearby guitar. It was all part of the beautiful symphony of her life. A life she had built from nothing but her own courage and an indomitable spirit. She had faced the deepest betrayal, the most crushing sense of powerlessness. She had been told she was nobody, that she had nothing. Yet she had not only survived, she had soared. She had proven to herself and to anyone who would listen that worth isn't given, it's claimed. That security isn't found in someone else's promises but in one's own resilience. Her journey had not been about getting revenge or even about simply getting what was hers financially. It had been about reclaiming her identity, her voice, her autonomy. It was about defining her own worth, independent of any man or any material possession. She had learned that the most valuable asset she possessed was not a house or a business or a car, but her own unbreakable spirit. She reached her bakery, stepping inside to the comforting warmth and the sweet aroma of her creations. The sign above the door, the Phoenix Hearth, now held an even deeper meaning. It was not just a name. It was a symbol of her life's work, a testament to the fact that from the ashes of betrayal, one can indeed rise, stronger and more radiant than ever before. Sarah Bennett, the woman who was told she was nothing, had become everything she was meant to be, and the silent satisfaction of that truth was a treasure beyond measure.